Great. Well, thank you very much for those of you who have joined today, taking the time over lunchtime to come and hear this webinar with Lucy and I about setting up research for success. So my name's Sally Kemkers. I'm one of the partners at Untapped Innovation, where we help a variety of clients across sectors and businesses to unearth three types of insight: human or user insight, product or technical insight, trend insight, and then we connect those together to develop transformational products and ideas. And then I've spent 17 years client side and then 10 years at Untapped. So this is a subject really close to my heart, of making sure that we set up research for success. And delighted to be joined by Lucy, who is Global Insight Lead for the Reckitt Innovation Centre of Excellence. So really interested to hear your point of view, Lucy, in your current client role of the importance of setting up research for success. Just to take a little bit of background for a moment, this is part of a series of webinars that Untapped are offering around Innovation Gym, and Gym's our capability arm. You can see here a menu of 8 of our training sessions that are high energy, intensive, chances to use your innovation muscles in specific areas. So aside from thinking about capability, we feel it all starts with insight and unearthing really good insight. So that takes you right back to research, which is why we wanted to talk today about the importance of setting up research for success. We're going to talk about why we think it's important. We'll talk about getting the most out of your agency, and 5 steps as well that we think are relevant. And there'll be a session for an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So as you go along, please write any questions that you think of in the chat function, and we'll get to those. And the camera's off and mute's on, but I can see you're doing that anyhow. So wanted to start by saying a few more words and properly introducing Lucy. Delighted to have you here, Lucy, as the Global Insights Lead at Reckitt for your Innovation Centre of Excellence. You've got over 15 years of FMCG experience, and with particular expertise in leading insights to drive business growth across a whole variety of categories. Qual and quant techniques, a whole variety of techniques I know you've worked on with us over the years, and particularly taking the multiple data sources and insights and joining those together to translate those into really actionable insight. And we've had lots of discussions about the importance of bringing the human voice into the room, into the business and communication, and communicating those insights to drive innovation and business growth. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's start with why we're talking about this today. So as I've talked to clients, I've heard lots about time pressure, reduced budgets, the fact that often our resources are shrinking, there's fewer people, and even those people in insight roles sometimes lack expertise. And then I think another point that we're hearing is there is an increasing number of sophisticated research techniques, which is fantastic and very exciting, but it can be quite a minefield out there for insight professionals. What are your thoughts on where the challenges really lie?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with all of these. I mean, it's interesting because I've done, category sort of insight roles where you're really embedded within the brand team. And now I'm in a capability insight role. So I'm trying to build a capability. So I'm speaking to our insights teams and our marketing and R&D teams to find out what are the research challenges that they've got from a capability point of view. And I think all of these ring true. In particular, I think time pressure, that seems to be coming from multiple angles. I think the growth of kind of e-com as a channel, there's almost a bit of an expectation now within companies that, well, we can get to market faster, so we can do everything faster. We can just compress the development timeline, which of course means you're compressing your research timelines. You're trying to sometimes learn as much in a shorter amount of time. And then of course we've had a global pandemic, which has meant that we've got huge swings in consumer behavior to try and get a handle on and an understanding on really on the back foot because it was happening before we were able to catch up. So I think there's different external forces that are leading to this sort of real compression of time that you have to do research. And I totally resonate with the number of research techniques and sources of insight and data. I think there are many out there, and it links a bit to people's expertise as well. We're not all expertise in all types of research, especially, some of the more, future facing sort of analytics, data science side of things. We're all trying to build up our skills in the areas where we've got gaps, and that does bring challenges to setting up research in the right way to get the best out of it.
Absolutely. A couple of really interesting points I want to bring up later. Your expertise, I think, I want to bring that up and what we can do about that. But time pressure, and that actually leads nicely onto the next point as we think about these 5 steps that we're outlining, and as we found these helpful in what you can do to set up research for success. So I'd like to talk through each of these. And the first one, investing time up front. I mean, it just made me think, listening to you, that creates a challenge for us before we've even started. We've got an Einstein quote here. We love Einstein quotes, and he probably never even said it, but I think the thinking behind it is very familiar, and the point that if you invest the time in defining what your problem is in the first place, it's going to be much quicker and easier to solve it in the long run. But I mean, as you see it, how easy is it for you and to convince your time that you really need to take a step back and plan out research adequately to get the best return on investment, to take that time at the start? Because it can't be easy.
It is challenging. I think, we've all been doing research for a long time. So, not just the insights people, that, the whole organization, the marketing teams are also usually very engaged in research as it happens as well. So there is a tendency for us to think, to preempt what kind of research we need to do. That can come from sort of requests coming to, from our sort of stakeholders. I'm sure you have it, Sally, coming probably from insights people, because we try and take as much of a step back as we can within, the time we've got. You try and open the door, take a step back. But what I like to do with an agency partner is allow them to challenge the team to take a bit of a further step back, because we manage to do it internally, and then our agency partners can help us a little bit, come back a little bit further, because you're usually coming with a bit more of a blank sheet and say, really, let's try and understand what we're doing here, because you're not as engrossed and in the nitty-gritty of the category day to day.
That's a great point. Use your agency for those sorts of discussions. And actually, as we get on to now starting to think about where we begin, I mean, for me, this is the most important point, is articulating what your business question is. So, what's your business objective? But in order to do that, you first need to start with what the business issue is. And I think it relates to what you were just saying there about, I see it as our role as insight leads, whether we're client side or agency side, to actually challenge those stakeholders or anybody trying to commission research and get them to think strategically and take this opportunity. Reminds me of a discussion recently with a client where they said they wanted to place a couple of focus groups because they had a product that was delivering a hygiene benefit and they wanted to evaluate that. And I couldn't really add any value to that because I didn't understand why, what was the purpose of it. So probed a bit deeper, and it turned out that their business had seen a really strong growth during lockdown, during COVID, but it was stagnating more recently. So the business question became, how do you continue to make that product and that brand relevant to the target? And that felt something you could do a lot more with. Can you talk a little bit about how you see this first step of getting to the business objective, and first of all, defining what the problem is to be solved?
Yeah, I mean, I like the business issue first, because I think the business issue allows you to be a little bit softer in the description of it. Let's just talk, let's just sort of write it how we say it almost. What's the issue that we've got here? And then the business objective is where you really try and crystallize what it is that you need to achieve for the business, not for the research, but for the business.
Yeah.
So what do you really need to do? And I think it's so critical to get that well written and as specific as possible, and make sure that it is a business objective, not a marketing objective, or not a development objective, but a business objective, because sometimes we can digress into what other types of objectives there are, but the business objective should really be rooted in usually having a commercial aspect to it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how you sort of know, are we really in the realm of it being business, or have we moved into into more of a marketing objective, if you were talking about sort of driving penetration or that type of thing. So I think it's about getting it right at the start.
Great, that's really helpful and makes a lot of sense in defining and getting people to be clear it's a business objective, because we'll come to other objectives later. I think that brings us to the next point. Very often at this point, we find teams are keen. Well, they're keen to do this from the start. It's so easy to sit there and just write your list of everything you want to learn, your research objectives. But we find if you're going to be really disciplined about this, a better way of doing it is to think next, what actions are these going to enable? Because we shouldn't be doing any research if it doesn't lead to a specific action. And these should all be linked. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you go to the action as the next step, partly because I think to me, you've got your business objective, which is what are we really trying to do here? What do we need to achieve?
Sorry, you don't need to learn about research.
And then what action is it going
I don't have in my head.
To kind of implement. So I think to me, it's more of a logical flow actually to go from business objectives then to action, because they are very much directly related. And I think once you know that the actions, that starts to help you formulate some of the research, and also the way you might do some of the research, because you know what types of activities you might want to do off the back end of it.
That's a great point, having that in mind. That makes sense. And then our fourth step is writing a list of research objectives. And I think this is where it can get a little bit out of control, particularly if you've got a whole team inputting, because you can get a bit carried away. But leading back to what you were saying around, if your business objectives are specific enough, they're focused on something commercial, you've got your actions defined, I think you can use that framework to check off as a checklist to make sure the research objectives really hold. And the other thing that I always feel is that, and I'd love your point of view on this, so many of our clients do a lot of research, and over the years they've done a lot of research, and people change their roles, and there are archives of insights sitting there. And I think one of the important tasks at this point is to mine everything you've got already and look and see, have we learned this already? And where are the gaps? And it's only really the gaps, the knowledge gaps, the things you don't know that should be on this list. What are your thoughts on making this research objective list?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely critical. And this is a really nice way to engage the multifunctional team, because I think a lot of companies now are trying to make insights more accessible, so democratizing insights and data. So at this point, you can really engage the multifunctional team to go and dive into those archives that you've got, or they might be platforms where you're capturing live data, on live feeds or trackers, or there's constant flows of information coming in from all different angles, I think. And I agree with you. You know, you have your business objective, and then actually you're already probably starting to formulate some questions in your mind, but often you can answer some of them, or you can go part way to answer some of them. So you start to formulate hypotheses around some of the data points and the observations that you're making within the archives that you've got. And it's from those hypotheses that then you can start to build your research objectives around. And I think that's the best way to formulate it, because then you're always adding to, you're not redoing.
Very clear, very clear. Fifth step, stakeholder check-in. We call this a final check-in, but as you and I have talked about in the past, it's really important to bring them with you along on the journey. But by the time you get to this point, sometimes these briefs are circulating for a couple of weeks or more, and perhaps we know business moves quickly, perhaps you've missed an actionability point, in which case there's no point in doing the research, or there's a new business need or something's changed. So I guess what are your tips for people on how best to get the stakeholder check-in, perhaps using this framework, bearing in mind it can be opening up a bit of a minefield and may feel like rework?
I think you need to bring them along on the story so far, because if you start at a point where you say, okay, we're just going to do some focus groups in, there's no story to bring them along. But if you remind them, and like most of the team hopefully will have been along some of the journey with you to get to this point, right? So you've brought them along, but it's always worth reminding people because they're managing multiple things. So, what did we start with? Okay, here's our business issue. What's now our business objective? We all went away. We've mined the data. These are the hypotheses we've created. Are we all aligned with those hypotheses? And do we still feel that the action to be taken is we're going to be able to take that action? Nothing has changed in what we've crafted here. So I think it's about bringing them along on that story as a recap, and like the framework you've captured is, it's very sort of deliberate through the steps. So it's really about distilling it down. I think, a lot of work's happen in the background, but distill it down to the key points and make it very clear. I mean, we often will start a meeting, the first slide, what are the decisions to be taken today? What are the alignments that we need? And that then sets everybody knows why they're there and what they, are kind of expected to contribute. And I think that helps to stop the scope creep as well.
Yes. I'm noting down some really interesting words you're using: specific, clear, distilling. It just all makes sense. And in this whole world of getting a better return on your investment, it feels like it's a long, painful process, but it actually, just with a bit of discipline, I think you can make it fairly efficient. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I think it's about, the more you kind of get ingrained with the team, that the team, you just kind of, this is the way you do things. So it can be a mindset shift, certainly. And that can be a bit of a journey. But I think once you've got everybody and this is the way we're typically going to do things, and you start with the bigger project, because it's more obvious for people to need to do it. So if you have to critical. You have to pick where to choose, to get people on board with this way of working, start with the bigger things that are going to have the much bigger investment in. And then you can bring it on board, probably in a bit more of an agile way for the lighter, smaller projects.
Yes, I like it. Now, I'm very aware we've not talked at all about the methodology, which is actually the whole crux of the research. But I think it is really important to define all of the background part first. And I think this brings us on to this broader topic of how to get the most from your agency. And you made a point very, very early on about this issue around having expertise in research. And the thought around an agency as being a strategic partner, and you can't possibly, none of us can keep abreast of all new techniques, but agency partners are there to to become experts in different techniques. So having a sort of co-creative joint approach with your agency, so having aligned within your team, and I think the agency can help ask some of those questions to get to that point. But once that's really, it's distilled, it's specific, it's business aligned, it's clear, I think then you're in a great position to work with your agency to figure out the right technique. And also a well-written brief is going to be pretty motivating and empowering. I know as an agency, the most exciting briefs are not necessarily the ones. I mean, it's always great to hear from a client if there's a particular technique they'd like to use or they've heard about, or likewise a technique they don't want to use and their reasons. But the most exciting briefs are the ones where it looks a bit impossible. How on earth are you going to solve that? And perhaps even a new technique or a modification of one is required. So from my side, that's where I think agencies can add the most value. How about from your point of view?
I totally agree. I mean, I think gone are the days where you sort of had a handful of research techniques to choose from, you know, and like you say, it's hard to keep up with all of the different types of solutions that there are out there, which is brilliant because it offers, you know, you to almost be able to create a jigsaw piece, you know, puzzle of techniques now, because so many of them you know, are online or they use a virtual element, so they're a bit faster and a bit cheaper. So why wouldn't you use multiple techniques? But you really need an agency then as a strategic partner to make those suggestions, because otherwise, you know, that's how you stretch your thinking into new tools as well, right? Because that's where you hear about things, you try them on live projects. So I think it's really important that we, you know, of course, we will have some preferred methodologies of doing things, but allowing our agency based on the brief to take a step back and say, well, what about this, this, and this? And, you know, these are the, you know, the additional value, because it's all about value creation. You've got so much to spend and you need to get the most value from it. So I think it's, yeah, I totally agree. You know, agencies are a part of the team, you know, the project team, and they bring with them their expertise, and that we as the clients should give the agencies the space to bring and for us to really leverage and access that expertise to get the most out of the partnership.
Mm-hmm. Great to hear. It brings us almost full circle back to the point you made at the very beginning around being short of time and getting that strong collaboration with your agency, and having them do quite a lot of the heavy lifting in helping discuss with you and bring new techniques to you and talk about the pros and cons can really save time. Plus your point about the number of agile online techniques now are also time saving, which is great. We've talked for nearly half an hour. I think as we just come to a close here, wanted to see if we have a bit of an opportunity for questions. And I can see here there's a question: what can agencies do to get the balance right when constructing the proposal between providing the detailed structure of the brief for stakeholders, do they even need it, so nothing is missed, versus keeping it simple to reduce time impact? And how do you make it most efficient for you, the client, to deal with the stakeholders? Okay, so lots there. Great question. What can it say? Maybe I should start from an agency standpoint. What can they do to get the balance right when constructing the proposal between providing a detailed structure of the brief for the stakeholders? Do they even need it? To ensure nothing's missing. So I guess, I mean, I think from an agency standpoint, constructing the proposal is about reflecting the language and the needs. And I always think it's really hard I'm trying to write a proposal now where I'm not allowed to communicate with the people who've written it, because it's a closed process. And it's so hard because it's to have that conversation open, to understand and probe, really make sure that at an agency side, we have totally understood that business objective, the actions that are going to be taken, and some of the information around that. So I think that has to be the first step, really. and then keeping it simple, because yes, I mean, I think, you know, it does have to be, once you're really crystal clear, you've thoroughly understood from the client side what they want, I think you can make the proposal quite succinct in terms of reflecting back their language and their objectives, and almost structure it in this kind of way, and then the focus can be on what you as an agency feel you can offer to address their questions, and what your point of difference is, and the proof, the case studies that you can do that. What about from your side, Lucy, how to make it most efficient for you dealing with stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things I was just scribbling down. I think sometimes it's almost useful to view a proposal a bit like a summary document, in the fact that it's quite, I like to have like almost like a top line overview slide, which you can use with more senior stakeholders to really just outline, you know, and almost like the framework that we've talked today, Sally, you know, you can take them to a very concise journey of, this is a business objective, this is what we want to be able to do, you know, in terms of the actions, and here's the research plan to address it. Are you aligned to it? Because essentially at that level, it's usually are you aligned for us to go forward? I think what the insight person and probably the working team might need a little bit, you know, particularly if we've got multiple agencies briefed, it really plays into the point that you said, Sally. It's about making sure that it's concise, but the points of difference are really pulled through, because often it's quite challenging to compare several proposals from different agencies. You're often comparing apples to oranges, especially as we've talked, where you've got many different types of methodologies in there. So you're trying to understand the difference between the methodologies that might be being proposed as well. So I think that's where, and I understand it's a tough balance, because in a way they can be sort of, they're a pitching document in some respects, but also they're an information document. So what's really critical to share for them to be able to make the decision, because I think that's going to help the process.
Makes sense. And I think this is time for one more question, which is for you, Lucy, around increased time pressure and the lack of internal expertise that we were talking about. Do you think this has meant that companies are turning more to trusted agencies to do more of that analysis, or is it led to more DIY, or both?
I suppose it depends on the company, but I would say a lot of it is moving towards DIY, which I think has its benefits and its challenges. You know, some organizations are really, I think, structured and staffed in a way that DIY self-serve is, you know, it's kind of easy to do, because you've got the right levels in the organization to support those different levels of activity. In other organizations that have very heavily relied on agency partners, then it's a little bit more challenging, and you have to find the balance about when it's sort of the right time to use a self-serve DIY tool versus using a full agency service. So I think it's a great question, because I think it's almost a bit of a paradox in a way, that you've got, you know, more time pressure and perhaps a lower skill level, but then we want to do more self-serve, which actually internally takes more time and requires more skill on certain platforms.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, fantastic. That's been really great, Lucy. I'm just posting here in the chat a link that hopefully people can see, to download a magazine that talks about everything we've discussed today in a little bit more detail. So feel free to click on that and download, and any issues, contact us.